Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Sprinklebeard, and today we are going to be covering a tank class in the game. We are going to be covering Livian. So the reason that we are covering specifically Livian out of all the epic tanks, she is kind of the first guaranteed tank that most players I think will get. So by doing her early on in the series, hopefully I can shine some light on her, show that she's kind of a good champion. I've seen a lot of people be like, she's your first good tank, but there's so many better other ones. I mean, yes, right? If we compare her to like legendaries, for instance, obviously the shade has been cast, but I'm here to kind of tell you she's pretty fantastic. So let's get into her. So Livian is this elfy looking defender. As much as I'm not really into elves, and I do not like this color scheme at all, this like lightish green is just not for me. I love the mace weapon. I think she looks pretty badass, to be honest with you. I do wish that she had a helmet of some sort, like maybe like rose petals or something that form into your typical helmet. But I will also admit she looks great without the helmet, so it's not like a necessary thing at all. Let's cover over here. So what is her job in the game, right? So in this game, we have defenders. And the huge thing about defenders is that they can block up to 3 units. And their cost is relatively the same. It's a little bit higher, but it's also because they just don't seem to die. On top of them being able to block more units, they usually have some type of added benefit. So most of them either have some self-healing, some stuns, maybe some like draining of max HP. That way they're not just a meat wall and absolutely nothing else. One very large advantage that Livian has right off the bat, she's actually part of 2 different factions, both being the Watcher and the Piercer. Everybody starts off with the Watchers, clan, if you will, and faction, there's the word. But also her being a Piercer, there's times where depending on what lord you get on your account, it can make a champion a whole lot better. I ended up getting a Racha on my main account, and she is the lord of the Piercers. She ended up making Livian this like super tank. The extra 15% stat increases were just absolutely massive. It just made Livian unkillable. Now, the thing I want to cover real quick before we go any further with her is that if we look at our hero fusions, we can fuse Livian. So again, this is one of those champions that I would heavily discourage you. Do not use an Awakening Stone on her. And the reason is you can just fuse extra copies of her. Now, does this mean that like if you have an Awakening Stone or if she's your favorite champion, you should absolutely not use it on her? That's up for you to decide. I think it's not your best play, as the generic Awakening Stones are very hard to come by. As you fuse more copies of her, you can feed those extra copies to herself to fully awaken her to 5. I only think she's really worth 4. I think her 5th one is probably nice the higher up into the game you go. I just stopped using Livian like 2 days ago, and the only reason is because I 6-starred a different tank instead. That is the singular reason that Livian is not used more in my party. I'm still debating if I want to 6-star her as a secondary tank, because in a lot of my team comps, I end up using Aracha, not only because she's a legendary, but her being a lord just gives me those extra stats to help out. Diffuser, you need the champion's Rex. This will potentially feel bad for certain players, that you're giving up your one main tank for a better tank. I will say though that Livian does like 3 times the job that Rex does in terms of a tank. What Rex does a little bit better than Livian, he can put a shield on himself, whereas Livian uses her shields to attack. I will explain later. So for that reason, Rex can sometimes be a bit of a better tank. They both have stuns in their kits, so Rex is comparable, but ultimately, I would say that Livian gets that, like the hands down, just has higher base stats, just tanks a lot more, and then when we read through her kit, she's able to heal herself rather than giving herself those tank stats, that extra shield stat. You also can use Cuke Cuke is perfectly fine. He's a poisoner. He could feel potentially bad to give up, so you might want to wait until you have copies of these two champions. Or if you're like super attached to Rex, obviously maybe you keep him then and you wait until you have an extra copy of him. But then we have, I think it's Rogers and Harlow? I don't remember their names. I don't, and I need to stop trying to remember the elite names. Anyways, we can fuse copies of her. It is truly not difficult. Rex feels like the harder to get out of it. A lot of times in the black market, one of these 4 slots will end up being a Cuke. So if you're ever hurting for Cuke, just keep looking at Dwarven Association, and he should show up pretty shortly. All right, back onto Livian and her details, right? So her job is to block as many units as possible and to, slow them down. So let's look at her kit. So every 3 attacks launched triggers shield bounce, inflicting a stun on the targets. The hero will restore 3% HP upon retrieving the shield. So shield bounce throws a shield that bounces like Captain America style to another enemy in range upon hitting the target. The shield can bounce up to 3 times and will not hit the same enemy multiple times. So she's Captain America, essentially. She throws her shield, it bounces around targets, and she heals for 3%. And most importantly, this is kind of an AoE stun that she has. Spinning Shield. When Elven Blessing is triggered, so that's her ultimate, the shield ignites and deals 15% AoE damage per second to all surrounding enemies. Additionally, the shield bounce triggered by an attack can bounce 1 more time. And then here we can see that she gets extra damage per second. Elven Blessing. So this is awesome. So here we can see it says Permain, or Permanent. She is one of the few champions in the game. I'm not actually even aware of others, to be honest with you. But once her ultimate activates, unless she dies, it's on. Like, the level has to end at some point, but she will ultimate through until the end of the level. So let's read what this amazing ultimate is. Receives the blessing of the elf deity, gaining an additional 20% physical damage reduction permanently. Meanwhile, the shield bounce triggered by the attack can restore 1% more HP. So between her basic and then her ultimate, that is 4% max HP every couple of attacks that she does. By leveling this up, we can reduce the skill cost, which gets her into her ultimate faster. Extra physical damage reduction as well. And again, minus to the cost. So this can get down to like 580. If I did my math right, that's wrong. If I did my math right, it would be 600, right? That we could reduce her cost to. And then we would have an extra 10% physical damage reduction. So it scales up to 30%. For her awakenings, the shield bounce can bounce up to 1 more time. This again is very helpful because every time her shield bounces on the 4th attack, she is stunning targets. So this gives you a 4th stun in her kit, potentially 5 once her ultimate is activated. An extra 100 defense, obviously not like stupidly amazing, still useful, right? The more stats we have, the better, the more physically resistant we are. That is the main damage source we're trying to mitigate through the game. The shield bounce restores 1% more HP. So again, it's base 3%. We go into ultimate, it's 4%. At awakening 3, it becomes 5% HP. And then again, if you're throwing that shield bounce and it's bouncing to more targets, you're not gaining more HP, but you're gaining that 5% HP back, and you're stunning targets, which helps with her longevity. All damage reductions plus 5%. So this is physical magic reduction and magical damage reduction. So very, very useful skill. Overall, she can become quite tanky. So I said that this is a champion that I feel like is really only worth the 4 awakenings. I will say, if you like her, right? Let's say you start using her and you're like, this is the tank for me. I love what she does. I'm super into the elf, motif, whatever. Yes, she's absolutely worth taking up to 5-star. For me, this is just a little bit of the, oh, okay. Initial Rage, plus 700. And the reason I say that this is only okay, her ultimate only costs 700. So the advantage to this is that you can summon her. She would instantly have that extra 30% physical reduction if you skilled her up first. Meanwhile, the shield bounce triggered by the attack can restore an additional 1% HP. So she comes out like in her ultimate form. The reason that I guess I'm not more impressed about this, or more like, oh, that's awesome, is just that. Like, some of the most fun build-up in a game is building up to your ultimate. Coming out and just instantly having your ultimate on, just permanently, it just takes away a lot of the mental of her kit. And she's already on auto, by the way. So like when she gets her ultimate, she just goes into it anyways. So it's good. It's really good. It's just not my flavor of tea, is the nicest way I can say it. All right, so what levels do we feel like Livian would be best in? This is going to be a little bit of a rude segment for me when I talk about defenders and healers. Wherever you need a defender and a healer. There's so much content in this game where I need something to block, or I need something to slow my enemies down, or I need something to make my enemies stationary. So when that happens, yes, you need a defender, and I hate to say this, a lot of the defenders kind of fill the same role. There are some nuances, and we'll get to them when those nuances come up. With that being said, though, a defender is just, hey, I need something to block in my Void Rift. I need something to take all of my damage. Yes, if you build your tanks right with a lot of HP and a lot of defense. For the record, HP is technically the better stat. Let me touch on this real quick because I did skip over it. When we fully 6-star her, she's got a healthy amount of defense. It's definitely not the highest. She has kind of one of the lower magic resists in the game. This is why the more HP we have, you end up mitigating more damage because you have more HP. Because she has a self-heal in her kit. The more HP you can heal, the more likely you are to survive things. So if you're not sure what stat to choose first, go with the HP percent gear first, or like as a primary stat, you want that HP percentage, and then follow it up with a defense percentage. In the extreme rare case where you're like, man, she is just not defending as much as I feel like she should be, you could go with defense. The reason I don't think this is the best reason to do so is that, again, when we look at that ultimate, she's already getting a 20% here, and then if you were to fully awaken her, a 20% here. If you skill her up, it's 30. And then if you fully awaken her, it's 35% physical damage reduction. So in order to help with her magical damage reduction, or just making sure that she truly does feel tanky, the more HP she has, the more she's healing, the more she feels like she's tanking. And then when your MR doesn't, resist as much damage as you want it to, she's got this enormous HP pool to absorb it. Her attack speed is 2.4, so it's a little bit faster than the average bear, which is nice. It's not a critical thing for her. You could give her attack speed, but ultimately I would focus much heavier on your HP percentage, your defense percentage. She actually doesn't really need rage, so you could do something like healing effect. You could do flat HP or flat defense. Both of those things will help her survive longer. If you really want her to be damaged, if you have HP percentage and defense percentage, you could go crit rate. I don't foresee that being the best for her, because again, we're not really depending on a lot of our defenders for their damage output. We're counting on them to sit in the way, to block things from passing by them, to stun them so that they take longer, so that some of our other champions, and we will get to some of these mages in the future here, but champions like Osiren, that when he attacks, he puts a ground effect down on the area, on the ground. So the synergy that our tanks have, that our defenders have, is with champions like Osiren. Yes, any champion will take advantage of, hey, this target's now stationary, I can just sit there and pound into them. Absolutely. But there's champions like this where the enemies can walk out of the ground area of effect, which can be a huge detriment to Osiren. This allows Osiren to place that ground puddle, and then he's doing the AoE damage. She is holding everything in place. So, when it comes to the campaign, she's a fantastic tank. So if you love tanks, or if you love, tanky elf women, this would be a reason that if you fused her early on, she will absolutely pay you back in spades, especially over Rex. The difference that you'll feel the early game pains of leveling her up from like 1 to 40, whereas the deeper into the game you go, you can just throw a whole bunch of tank gear on them, and then you level them up so fast, or you're using them in so much content, they just naturally will level up extremely fast. So campaign, she's fantastic. In the arena, if you need a tank, I would say she's very usable. I don't foresee her as like the best tank for the arena. For things like single target, she is fantastic because she's just reducing all that physical damage. And then for the sustained DPS is the other big one. She will help slow things down from getting through her. However, a lot of the sustained DPS, like the higher up you go, the damage either starts scaling heavier, or there is one wave of all magic damage. So it's designed to obliterate your whole team. She might struggle there, but her ability to stun those targets to keep them in place longer for your DPS just to nuke them, or place your DPS outside of where their rings are at. When you've played sustained DPS, you'll know exactly what I mean. That will help you out tremendously. So when it comes to raids, we're going to go down this left column, and then we're going to go down the right column. So in promotion raids, she is perfectly fine in things like the melee attack and the endurance. The endurance one is really meant for defenders. I ended up like at the very beginning of the game using defenders, and then after that, never again. They are perfectly fine to use in the endurance. In the endurance, there's always a poison mist going on, so it just slowly drains your HP. So obviously tanks having this massive HP pool takes them a lot longer to die. They usually have some type of extra sustain in their kit to help them live longer. So they are good here. Just understand that when it comes to farming, and eventually the more you play the game, you want to get these farms out of your way fast, where you're like, oh, I want to be able to get my emblems and move on. Therefore, yeah, you switch off of it. In the melee attack, I actually did find her very advantageous. I was often putting Ein, the spear dude, behind her, and him reaching over her gave him the safety, and then she was slowing things down or stunning them, which now Ein got a rework recently. By the time you're watching this video, he's always been reworked. He now has a pursuit mechanic where he deals extra damage to stunned targets. So Ein specifically will rely on Livian a bit more. Mages, she is perfectly great in the mages. There's usually only like 1 or 2 ground spaces for you to even occupy. So for using Livian there to stop things long enough for your mages just to keep sit there pelting out their damage can feel good while you're in that leveling up phase. Once your mages get to the point where they're one-shotting the waves though, you can obviously ditch the tank at that point. But if you like it for safety, there's nothing wrong with that. Marksman, again, it is all flying enemies. This is one of those places where she just does not belong. You could use her for, like, if you have Aracha, you could use her for the synergy of, cool, she's another star piercer, and you want 5 on your team. I don't think even that's the best use of her. I've said this in other videos. The only reason I would bring her into the Marksman is just for the experience. If you have 4 to 5 Marksmen that are just tearing through the level, you could put Livian in here so that she's leveling up while you play through the level. Clan Boss. Clan Boss is much more about your DPS and just, chunking through this massive HP monster. For that reason, I don't actually encourage her here. She doesn't have any AoE team buffs, and she doesn't guard anybody on your team. Yes, she could probably sit out in front of Dragon for longer than, most. You have a small chance for her to survive the breath attack. I believe the breath attack is magic based. I haven't fully determined that yet. That is my theory, and I'm going to be testing it probably later today. So if I figure it out, I'll let you know. Artifact Material Raid. I was using her heavily in here. Her shield bounce can help slow down or help stop some of the minions coming in from the sides. I really liked her in this Artifact Material Raid. I will say though, again, I had a Lord skill that increased her. Now, every account does get Ein on it, so her base stats should be higher than majority of your other tanks. With that being said, make sure you pair her with a Lord to really get the most out of those tank stats. 15% stat increase, or 15 for a legendary Lord or 10% for an epic Lord is very valuable stats. You cannot stack those increases though. So like I have a Racha, I have Ein, I can't put both of them at the front of a party and then she would double, like, it depends on which party I put her in, but she would get the benefits of that particular Lord. Tide. Tide is kind of, again, this weird thing because it cares about your battle power of your deployed champions. So when we go to withstand the wave, and I'm not going to go through a wave because I can't complete it, but it cares about the battle power of the summoned champions. So here from left to right, it does show the battle power of these champions that I have. So if I was to say, okay, Volca, you're out because you're less than my Dolores. Oh, but my Dolores I can't summon because I have no more platforms. So I could use Livian somewhere. And because I have a Racha, she does get the extra range on her. Or maybe not. Maybe that's only in the campaign. There are certain waves of enemies that come in that are weaker, right? That have a low attack here, where having just a large defensive wall could help you. So if enemies are breaking through your lines and getting to this back wall, yes, you want to switch over to defenders rather than fighters. However, where I am at on this account, I don't really need the defenders just yet. I am getting to a point where this front line is dying pretty frequently. However, they're doing their job. They're delaying things long enough. They're dealing enough damage that a lot of my AoE champions are picking everything off reliably. Resource raid. So again, we mentioned this in the Wrath video, so that is why I say again, there is a choke point on the experience raid and the gold raid where we would want to use these champions. Retreat now. So we want in here, we want Miss Livian, we want Osiren, and we want Ein. So as we're playing through this, right, having a Livian here to block the path will help slow down or just completely stop these champions. For the record, my Livian is currently unequipped. I just unequipped her last night. For this video, I'm just not going to equip her. She's still going to do her job for the content that we are doing. As you can see, she's only taking 79 damage. I have some skills into her, but I have not awakened her once, and I've been debating that. And as you can see, she's actually killing off these goblins just with her base stats. Here is her glowing ultimate, which I do think looks amazing. I do dislike the shield. Every single shield makes a sound effect, which for those of you who play with sound, this can be a bother. But here I'm going to show off kind of her best potential, is that while she is blocking here, she can stop the enemies so that Osiren's ground puddle is doing a lot of damage. And then here we can see Ein attacking from the back can help push them back out, or is just able to reach over top of her. So there's going to be these levels where we absolutely want that advantage. Now this is just going very slow. Please kill him quickly. Ein is also unequipped, so this is kind of a bad showcase. I should have equipped them right before the video. But here you can see that these goblins, who are also a fast walking unit, they're just walking out from where the puddle is. This is where your defender class can be amazing, or if you like champions like Osiren, this is how you can make the most of them, is by pairing in champions like Mari or I to freeze and stop the target, and then Osiren, with his ground puddle effect, can sit there just ticking away at these enemies. Because of his very slow attack speed, they rely on the dot damage of the throw, or specifically his ultimate. So we wait for him to throw his scythe out first, and then ultimates and everything in these squares, he is hitting for that defiled ground damage, which feels amazing. But yes, of course, any other champion that can take advantage of a stopped enemy, right? Them just not moving, so your target, you can sit there and just, you know, annihilate them with your damage over time. Feels great. Gear Raids. Where is she best at in here? Gear Raid 3, you should never use her. Again, she cannot reach air targets, so Livian here just is a sitting duck that does nothing. You might be able to justify and say, well, some of the enemies slow down when they attack, and if they attack Livian, that's helpful. That is true. The problem is the tank position is no further in front than any of your other archer positions in that level. So definitely do not take her into Gear Raid 3 unless it's for that synergy bonus and you have nothing else to do there. I would still argue a mage would probably be better because it can at least attack in the air. Gear Raid 1, she is perfectly fine to be up on that front line. There's not really a reason for it. I would say if you have the, I think it's the cultist lords, they gain a benefit for attacking CC'd targets. So anything slowed, stunned, immobilized, blah, blah, blah. So for that reason, you could use her in here. However, I typically think it's best to just go with a lot more mage damage. And then once I get up to into 19, I'll have a better opinion. But I still won't imagine that we want a tank to really stop and delay things unless that makes sense at the time. We'll see. Gear Raid 2 is definitely the place that Livian will shine the most. Her damage reduction will definitely help her with the boulder enemies running down. Again, what they do, these rollers, they look like boulders. They look like Gorons from Legend of Zelda. They roll down the hill at you, and then as they hit you, they do a max HP % damage as physical to the target that they hit. So this means that your tanks with their really high defense are going to take much less damage from that roller damage compared to any other champion. As well as their massive HP pool lets you heal them back up, or they don't need to heal instantly the moment they're touched once, because those rolling Gorons, for all purposes, they do punch hard afterwards. So having a defender in the way of that will absolutely feel amazing. Faction trials. So again, she's part of two different factions. She's part of the Watchers as well as the Star Piercers. In the Star Piercers, it hasn't been common that I've needed her. She has been very helpful. Again, my main account and the stream account both got blessed with a lot of piercers very early on. So I'm not having that particular issue of needing a tank. However, she is a tank that you can fuse for those if you need some extra delay or some extra time restraint. On the Watchers, she was definitely much more useful. There's one level where, I don't want to say it was a flood of enemy, but there's a lot more numbers of enemies, and I didn't get my Watcher mages up because it was either Nero or Soliel, and Nero's very high cost. Soliel, I want improvements to. I will cover her in a future video. So since I ignored them, I needed the defender, and Livian performed super well. Lastly, in the Void Rift, I have felt that Livian has been absolutely amazing. Again, the only reason that I recently switched her out is that I 6-starred a different champion who is better designed for Void Rift duties than Livian. Otherwise, Livian was my go-to tank. One of the other nice things is that where I'm getting, the higher up into the Void Rift I'm getting, every slot of your party starts to matter a bit more as you get towards the end of the Void Rift. And I got to the final boss of the Elite Void Rift last night, and I ran into kind of like a two-prong problem of I needed a tank that was better designed for Void Rift, or I needed to stick 6-star Livian, and it didn't feel amazing mentally to be like, oh, I want a 6-star Livian right away. And again, that's just because I mainly am only using her in the Void Rift. Other than that, like, yes, if I ever needed a tank, it was her and Olog side by side tanking everything. It just got to that point where Olog is technically a little bit better for what I need compared to Livian. And Livian's stun is valuable. I'm still killing things fast enough that I don't need this. Pardon me, I don't need the stun. I just need the hiccups. I just need the block so that I can put out my damage and kill the things. And usually I kill the things so fast that I don't need a long-lasting tank. I just need the control for 5 to 10 seconds. As long as she survived 5 to 10 seconds, that's all I needed. So for that reason, Oleg kind of went a little bit ahead of her. I'm still debating whether or not I want to 6-star her. The reason is that I now have another tank that has a different party synergy, where I might want that before Livian. Most defenders, though, I will argue, do not take them to 6-star until you need a 6-star defender. So you will understand what that means as you play through the game. But when you 6-star a defender, yes, they'll be able to tank everything. As you saw, though, she's not putting out tons of damage. Like, yes, she was doing fine against goblins in the EXP raid, but that's not what we want her for anyways. We're not counting on her for her damage. Even with her at 6-star, she probably will not feel like she's putting out a lot of damage. I'll do some limit testing, and if I find that I am wrong, that her damage output is great, I will put a note in the comments, like in the description below, letting you guys know, hey, damage with this much crit rate, this much crit damage, this is what I found. She's a beast. I don't foresee that happening, and it's usually not what we want from our tanks anyways. We want them to tank. We want them to block. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that information was helpful for you. Take your tanks up to 5-star and then leave them there until you get far enough in the game where, crap, I really do need a 6-star champion to tank this immense damage from some otherworldly boss like the bosses of the Void Rift, or maybe some high-end arena nonsense. Same thing too, maybe a high-end campaign as well. But, of course, until that next time, wish you the best of luck. Ta-ta.